these ultrafiltration devices, these spin concentrators, in order to concentrate our protein. They say single use, but like many things in science that say single use, you can actually reuse them at least a couple times, probably 3 or 4 being the limit. There's some things to know before you try this though. The 2 main problems that might come from reusing these filters is 1, the membrane actually gets dried out and cracks, and so things go through that shouldn't, like your protein. And 2 is that the membrane gets clogged because it's all dirty with your protein and things, and so then the things that should go through can't go through. And so you want to keep an eye out for these. You can kind of monitor what's in here and what's in here and see if your protein's going through, see if you're going really slow, which could indicate clogging. All those things would be signs that, okay, well, maybe it's time to actually use a new one. But let's try to preserve this old one as long as we can so we can get as many uses as possible. And so how we're going to do this is by keeping the membrane moist, and by keeping things from growing on it, and by keeping it clean. So basically, in here you have a chamber. There's a membrane. The membrane in this one is in this little paddle, and in other ones it's on a V. That membrane is what you choose carefully, the molecular weight cutoff, so that your protein stays up here, and the things that you want going through, the small salts and things, all the buffer components are going to flow through. If the membrane is not clogged, and if the membrane's cracked, then the protein is going to flow through. So we're going to avoid those things by keeping the membrane moist. And how we're going to keep the membrane moist and clean is with 20% ethanol typically. So we're going to store it with 20% ethanol in here, as well as some in the base, to kind of keep this moist environment so you're not worrying about evaporation and all the ethanol going bye-bye. The 20% ethanol is going to be good at keeping bacteria and fungi and mold and stuff from growing, but it's also good at making your salts crash out, and so salts precipitate and things, and so you don't want to put the 20% ethanol right after you have your nice salty solution in here. So instead, once you've used your filter for your protein, now you want to go take some water, put water through it. Water will wash away the salts, and then you can do the 20% ethanol. So you just fill it up with water, take it for a spin just like you would be doing concentrating, so just a couple minutes will be good, enough to get it kind of washed through. Then you can do the 20% ethanol, and then do a spin a little through that, and then store it with the 20% ethanol. Again, like in here and to here. Make sure you're covering the entire membrane a little extra, and have extra on the outside to prevent an evaporation, and stick that in the fridge to prevent more evaporation and things like this. We want to keep the membrane moist. So when they come to you, they're dry because they have some sort of like protectant on the edges, like with the membrane, on the surface of the membrane. There's typically like glycerol or something to keep it moist. And that's one of the reasons why you often do like a pre-spin, where you kind of wash off the membrane and the buffer that you want to put your sample in. But after you do your sampling, well, now there's not going to have that protective layer on there. And so that's why you need to make sure that you're storing it with the liquid. And again, you're not going with the ethanol right after your protein because you don't want to precipitate out the salts. Also, if you were then to go to try to reuse it and it has the ethanol all over it, and now you're trying to put your protein through, well, now you're going to have that salt precipitate and your protein precipitate, and it wouldn't be good. So before you try to reuse it again, you want to use water. Make sure too that when you're doing that spin with the water, you kind of monitor and make sure that the filter is not clogged, that it's actually going through. And so hopefully this is going through fine, and if it's not, then you're going to have some problems. If it's going too fast, it might indicate that you've got some cracks in your membrane. If it's going too slow, then it could indicate your membrane was clogged. And so you want to make sure that when you're kind of doing your protein concentrating in any way, that you're making sure that you're kind of like washing the membrane when you're doing your pipetting, to make sure that you don't have protein buildup on here that would then kind of keep the flow from going, and that makes you lose your protein. Speaking of protein being on here, you typically only want to use the same one for the same protein. And so maybe you work with multiple proteins in the lab and you purified a lot of different times. You can use that same concentrator for the same protein that you're purifying, but you wouldn't want to use it for a different protein just in case there's like stuff left or different buffers, whatever. So typically that's just the best practice. And so you want to label really, really well. So label the cap, label the side, and remember too that this part comes out, and so you want to label on here as well, so that when you go and you dump this out, you still got this part. So to review, you do your spin, you spin water through, get rid of the salts. Then you spin that 20% ethanol through to kind of just clean things off. and to have it so you've got this preservative that's going to keep it from growing mold, bacteria, fungi, all that good stuff, or I guess bad stuff. You're going to fill it up with 20% ethanol, fill 20% ethanol in the bottom to prevent evaporation, stick that in your fridge. Now, when you want to go and try to use it again, you want to take it out of your fridge, make sure that it's still, like, there's still liquid in here, because if there's not, then your memory is going to be cracked, and it's probably a sign that it was leaking out. So you want to take it, you want to now spin that through, do water through, now you can go ahead and do buffer through, and now you can do your protein through. Once you do your protein through, then you can do this cycle again, and so again, probably not more than 3 to 4 times. You want to monitor it for signs of clogging, in that you're going slower when you're reusing the membrane. Monitor it for cracking, and make sure that you're not having your protein flow through. So hopefully that helps you save some money, save the environment, all that great stuff. And so keep your eye out for things that are like single use, but really you can kind of bend the rules. And so a lot of it you just have to test out and see. And there's a lot of great websites and things, like Pipette Jockey has some great tips for things to make things more frugal and all this, and more earth friendly. So hope it helped.